So, good morning, children, and welcome back to today's class. So, in this class, we are going to study about the Indian National Army. So, the idea of Indian National Army was conceived in Malaya by Mohan Singh. So, just remember that it was Mohan Singh who was the person behind the Indian National Army. So, who was this Mohan Singh? He was an Indian officer in the British Indian Army. So, an army officer serving for the Britishers in India. He was Mohan Singh and he was behind the Indian National Army formation or organizing. So he decided not to join the retreating British army and instead went to the Japanese for help. So by this time already the British were suffering with many kind of setbacks in Second World War, and also the British army was retreating. Retreating means it was unable to compete with the forces of the Allied powers, which are a group of countries in Second World War. So this made him to feel confident that yes, now he can go and take the Japanese help to fight against this British. So if their power is deteriorating, then he can take the Japanese help and he can organize a military revolt against the British. That was his plan. The Japanese had till then only encouraged civil Indians to join the anti-British organizations. So till then, what was the thing going on? Any civilian, any youngster, and all the civilians who were inspired by the revolutionaries and all, if they wanted to go, I know Japan, and know if they wanted to, if they feel like fighting against British, the Japanese used to encourage such youngsters and all other people. But for the first time, a military officer coming with a proposal of fighting against British from Indian side was very new to Japanese also. So till then, the Japanese had no concept of forming a military wing consisting of Indians. Only it used to encourage civilian Indians. That means common people or youngsters who got inspired through these revolutionary movements and all. They were encouraged to join the they were encouraged by Japanese to join against the struggle, I mean, to join against the British. But here, for the first time under Mohan Singh, they got a new concept called military wing should be formed against India. I mean, it should be formed against British in India. So, Indian prisoners of war, that means prisoner of wars, were handed over by Japanese to Mohan Singh, who inducted them into Indian National Army. So by this time, British, they took Indians to different parts of the world and they were involving them in wars. Now, as Mohan Singh, the military officer of British Indian Army, himself came and sought help of Japan. Now Japan, in favor to Mohan Singh, it handed over all prisoners of war, because earlier these Indian prisoners of war were taken by Japan in Second World War, because the Indian soldiers who participated on behalf of British against Japan, they were taken as prisoners when Britain lost war. For example, I'll tell you, when Britain took Indian soldiers and fought against Japan in Singapore, and Singapore was no, British was defeated there. When British was defeated, the Japanese took Indian soldiers as prisoners of war. Now, all such Indian prisoners of war in various parts, they were handed over by Japanese to Mohan Singh, because now Mohan Singh joined hands with Japan. So, and what Mohan Singh did, he inducted them into Indian National Army, and the fall of Singapore was crucial. For this brought 45,000 Indian soldiers who were as prisoners into Mohan Singh's sphere of influence. So that is when Singapore was lost by British and Allied forces, almost the 45,000 Indian soldiers who were like prisoners to Japan, they were all handed over to Mohan Singh, and Mohan Singh took them and joined them in Indian National Army, so which was a military wing of Indians against British. and by the end of 1942, 40,000 men expressed their willingness to join the Indian National Army. So slowly, the popularity of Indian National Army was rising, and almost 40,000 people again joined this army. It was made clear that at meetings of leaders of Indian community and of Indian army officers, that the INA would go into action only on the invitation of Indian National Congress and people of India. So now, when Indian National Army was formed, very regularly the meetings used to be conducted between the Indian community there, the Indian people living there in other places or outside India. Also, these Indian army officers who are willing to join again. So that's the Indian community of Indian army officers, and the other Indian community and Indian officers. They decided that until the Indian National Congress and now people of India invite them this army to come and combat against British, they decided that they should keep quiet till then and make grounds prepared for a better standard army. So within in March 19 in 30th March 1942, there was a conference held in Japan's capital city Tokyo. So it was mainly due to Raj Bihari Bose's efforts. A conference was held at Tokyo from 28th to 30th March in 1942. So between whom this conference was held, Indian officers, both military and civil, proceeded to Tokyo to meet the Japanese High Command. So to meet the Japan's head, who is organizing with all the warfare of Second World War and all. So what the Indians did was Indian military officers, both civil and military. Okay, generally I told you that there are people who joined from civilians also into the they were trying to enter Japan and take its help to join the fight against British, right? So those civilians and some officers also like Indian officers belonging to both civil and military who wished to join the movement against British, they under the leadership of Raj Bihari Bose. Okay, Raj Bihari Bose was a man behind structural organization of Indian Independence League. Now, under that man's leadership, they went to Tokyo and they wanted to meet the Japanese head. And at the conference, the following decisions were taken. So, in this conference, certain decisions were taken. What were those decisions? Expand and strengthen the Indian Independence League. So, Indian Independence League was an important association among various associations of Indians outside India. So, this league was most probably, it was created for for the purpose of achieving so to expand and strengthen the Indian Independence League. We know that this Indian Independence League was structured or was properly organized by Raj Bihari Bose. It was one among the various associations that Indians had outside India. So this Indian Independence League had two objectives also, right? That is liberation of India, and also second objective was it wanted to help Indians who are outside India during the critical period of Second World War. So that was Indian Independence League. So they wanted to expand this and strengthen this Indian Independence League, and to form under the overall command of the League of the League an Indian National Army, that is an army of Indian liberation. So what happened now? Already efforts were going on for the creation of Indian National Army. So to form under the overall command of League an Indian National Army, that is the Army of Indian Liberation. So all such associations and military soldiers and all, they wanted to come under the command of Indian National Army. So this was another decision taken, and to hold a conference at Bangkok to consolidate these decisions. So continuing with this Tokyo conference, they wanted to conduct another conference at Bangkok, so which is Thailand, and they wanted to consolidate. That means they want to sum up all the decisions and come up with a action plan. So when Indian National Army and other things were created, this was the other efforts going on outside India as a part of freedom struggle. So what is this Bangkok Conference? What happened there? The Bangkok Conference was held from June 15th to June 23rd in 1942. And how many delegates participated in this conference? More than 150 delegates from various parts of the world, or from various parts of the eastern part of the world, where, I mean, these are participated by Indians actually. So from Malaya, Singapore, Burma, Thailand, Hong Kong, Manila, and Java, they were present at the conference. So various officers and various civilian leaders and other common people who wanted to take up the struggle, they all know, and mostly delegates, okay, the representatives of Indians from these places, they have represented themselves at conference, and they passed certain resolutions. So after finishing Tokyo conference, we said that the last point is they wanted to conduct a Bangkok conference. According to that resolution, now they have started Bangkok conference on from June 15th to June 23rd in 1942, and they passed some resolutions. What are they? Invitation to Subhash Chandra Bose to come from Europe and to lead this movement. So the movement which is going to take up under Indian National Army command must be, they wished, these people, they wished that Subhash Chandra Bose, who was a very successful leader, he must lead them in this movement. So they passed a resolution that Subhash Chandra Bose must be invited and he must become the leader of the movement. And they also created a council of action. So a council of action to control and guide the whole movement. Now movement is being built outside India. What kind of a movement it is? It's a kind of armed rebellion. So for this armed rebellion movement, a council of action, that means an action committee, was also proposed to set up. And for this action, and the third point says that for this action committee or council of action, Raj Bihari Bose must act as president. First thing is Subhash Chandra Bose must be invited, and he was asked to lead the movement. Second thing is an action committee was proposed to guide the movement. And third point says that for that particular action committee, Suraj Bihari Bose must act as a president. And appointment of Mohan Singh as commander in chief of Indian National Army. So already they were planning that the all such associations with their soldiers must work under the commandship of Indian National Army. So for that Indian National Army, whatever whoever are all the soldiers from various parts, they must be under the commandership of Mohan Singh. So action committee is different from all the armies. Action committee decides how to do, what to do, and plan. For that, Raj Bihari Bose would be president, and the person who leads all the armies into battlefield was Mohan Singh. So he was commander in chief of all the armies of Indian National Army. So these are the decisions taken by Bangkok Conference. So, contribution of Subhash Chandra Bose. How Subhash Chandra Bose entered into the freedom struggle now under Indian National Army. So, you know that earlier he was arrested because of sedition and all. That means he went against the government activities earlier. And you know, after his resignation from Congress, he was kept in jail. But later on, he was due to his illness, he will be house arrested in Kolkata, and from there he will escape, no, secretly, and he will reach to other countries like Japan, Russia, and he will flew away to those countries. So he was instrumental in the formation of Forward Bloc, right? You know this Forward Bloc, which is a leftist wing in Congress, and you know what are the activities it was proposing. So as he was very instrumental in proposing Forward Bloc, and this man was he had that experience of working with Indian National Congress. Even Indian National Army thought it would be better if they invite and make Subhash Chandra Bose as their leader. So, after evading the British Indian authorities, Bose led the freedom struggle outside the country. So, naturally, after his house arrest and his escape to Japan and other places, he started leading the national movement from outside India. And the active phase of Indian National Army began when Subhash Chandra Bose arrived at Singapore in July 1943 by German and Japanese submarines. So after Europe, and when he got invitation in 1942 from this, the conference from the Tokyo conference, by 1943, okay, July 1943, he arrived to Singapore. So in Singapore, how he arrived through the submarines of German and Japanese, because by this time he was most wanted person for British outside India. The British were searching for him, and now he secretly arrived in Singapore, which was a Japanese colony now, because it was defeated. The Britishers were defeated in Singapore, and it went into the hands of Japanese. So he thought it would be a safe place to go, and as he got invitation from this Bangkok conference, he also went to Singapore. Sorry, earlier I said that it was Tokyo, but he got invitation from the Bangkok conference. And 2 days uh, later, he officially took charge of Indian Independence League. Bose was greeted as Netaji, the great leader. So first, when he arrived in Singapore, the Indian Independence League was primarily his goal, and so he immediately joined as a in charge of the Indian Independence League, and he was greeted as Netaji. So people call him Netaji as a great, which means the great leader. You can see Subhash Chandra Bose here. This was Indian National Army, but first initially Indian Independence League. First he joined and took as in chargeship, and he was trying to understand what these associations were trying to do. So in August 1943, he took charge of Indian National Army. So in July he came and he became in charge of Indian Independence League, and by August 1943 he took the charge of Indian National Army, and he became its supreme commander. So first Indian Independence League, then he joined. He also became in charge of Indian National Army, and he set up the Indian National Army headquarters in Yangon and in Singapore and began to reorganize it. That means, see, he considered that it requires a headquarters. So what he did, he kept headquarters in Yangon. So Yangon is a place; it's a large city in Malaysia, and also he kept the headquarters of Indian National Army in Singapore. So these two places are the headquarters of Indian National Army now, and he also made certain changes so that the Indian National Army would become very strong, and recruits were made from civilians also. So that was the one thing which Subhash Chandra Bose did very regularly. He encouraged civilian peoples to join this Indian National Army. A women's regiment called the Rani Jhansi Regiment was led by Dr. Lakshmi Swaminathan. So Subhash Chandra Bose even encouraged women's regiment. So that means a group of women soldiers. So that regiment was called Rani Jhansi Regiment. And also recruitment and training camps were opened. So she is Dr. Lakshmi Swaminathan. You can call her the first army officer of an India, and recruitment and training camps were opened in large numbers to cope with the rush of volunteers offering themselves for Indian National Army. So when this information was known that under Subhash Chandra Bose, Indian National Army was being organized, many thousands of people started volunteering. They came for joining this army. Now, now what they did was to mobilize or to organize these people. They have conducted some recruitment camps and training camps, and slowly they have handled the issue of more people joining into Indian National Army. So, what were the objectives of this Indian National Army? Now, this Indian National Army is under the leadership of Subhash Chandra Bose, and it had certain objectives and goals. The main objectives of Indian National Army were the following: to organize an armed revolution and to fight the British. First point says that Indian National Army doesn't want to have any peace talks or something else like that. It wanted to have an armed rebellion. That means using weapons, they wanted to fight a war with British. Since it was not possible for the Indians to organize an armed revolution from their homeland, this task must be assigned to Indians living abroad, particularly living in East Asia. So, this armed rebellion which they were planning, they cannot organize from their homeland, because you know very well that uh, this this Indian National Army wanted to take an armed rebellion. So which will be strictly monitored, and it can be suppressed if it starts in India. So, and within India it is very difficult to keep hide everything and make people training and all. So they said that the objective of Indian National Army is to fight British from outside India. So that is, they will prepare all the armies outside India, and one day finally they would go and fight against the British in India. So that was the second objective. So that means the war would take place from outside attack, and to organize a provisional government of a free India in order to mobilize all the forces effectively. See, there is a need of a government here, and because the armies are dependent on the countries like Japan now, so whatever they require and how to do planning and everything, see, modern weapons which they're saying, all planes, tankers and ammunition and all will be provided by now the Japan and other such countries. So to have a negotiation with those leaders and regularly to maintain a particular order and other things between the armed forces, they formulated the concept of a provisional government. That means a temporary government of free India. They call it as Provisional Government of India. And that was another goal. Total mobilization of Indian manpower and money for a total war. So in this process of taking these forces against British, to mobilize such manpower and also money required for people there. See, the armies, they need some food and other things, and to spend on them they require certain money. So where to pool those resources and all, that was also a goal of Indian National Army. And the motto of Indian National Army was unity, faith and sacrifice. So this is, you can call it like a generalized one, that they all wanted to remain united. They should have faith that with this revolt they can successfully drive British away, and also sacrifice. So as it is war, definitely there would be loss of lives and all from Indian side also. For that sacrifice they have to get prepared. So Provisional Government of Free India. So Indian National Army was a revolutionary army. You know that they wanted to find with some kind of weapons. It was unique in its own way, and unlike many other armies, engaged in a global war. So how you can say that it's a global war? Because on one hand they have to fight against the armies which are going against Japan, as well as they also wanted to fight against British in India. So globally, this army has become a very famous one during those days, and it was an army organized on foreign soil. So that means in Singapore, Malaya, and all in such places, they have organized these armies. That means not organized within the country, outside the country, this has been organized. Hundreds of kilometers away from its motherland. Imagine the amount of efforts kept by our leaders in organizing this army outside India. So it is not that easy. So it was dependent on foreign powers. Now we can say that in a way, what is provisional requirements, duties, we can find out here, because continuously the Indian National Army is dependent on foreign powers here. It was created with the support of foreign powers like Japan. It was functioning because of them. All recruitment training and money, all weapons like artillery, rifles, ammunition, means bullets and all, planes, tanks, whatever it is required for the Indian National Army, it will be completely provided by the the British, the Japan and other allied powers. Now, to continuously have a kind of interaction with the Japan High Command or some other thing, they need a provisional government. So that provisional government will do all such requirements. And even for men, clothing, food, and other civilian supplies, they have to depend on the foreign powers. As they organize it themselves outside India, they can't receive any support from India except the manpower. Now, remaining all the military and other powers would be given to them by the foreign powers like Japan and Singapore, Myanmar, and other such things. However, its greatest asset was the spirit of self-sacrifice. So people in this Indian National Army or the soldiers were very much ready to sacrifice their lives and enthusiastically volunteered to lay down their lives. So that was the spirit of nationalism they had. And Subhash Chandra Bose set up Provisional Government of Free India. So as per their resolution, they have decided to set up this provisional government in Singapore. So in October 1943, provisional government was also set up in Singapore. So this provisional government was set up in October 1943 in Singapore, and the provisional government then declared war on Britain and the United States. See, after the formation of this provisional government with its armies called Indian National Army, it has declared its war on Britain. So you know why they have declared war on Britain, because they were the people who were controlling Indians and they wanted to liberate from Britain. So naturally, their war on Britain would not be very surprising. But why they declared war on United States? See, those days, Japan under Axis powers, it had its rival in Allied powers, United States. So, as Japan is favoring them, definitely Japan's enemy also should be enemy for this Indian National Army. So Indian National Army was also preparing its things to fight against United States. But initially they would just go for the Britain. So the provisional government was recognized by the Axis powers and their satellites means their friendly neighbors, including Japan, Germany, Italy, Burma. So Axis powers were this Japan, Germany, Italy, and Burma. So all this and Thailand. So all these countries they have recognized Indian National Army as an official army that would go and fight against Britain. There are two duties for this provisional government. One was to launch and conduct struggle that will bring about the expulsion of British. That means the primary objective of this provisional government, which was started by Subhash Chandra Bose, was to drive the British away from India. That was first goal, expulsion of British and their allies. Allies means during those days, British, France, and America, and all they were like allied powers. So now see, America's case is different. Why they joined later and all, whether they were from the beginning allied, that we will see later. Don't confuse with that. So, British and the favoring nations in World War, British and other group of countries were together, and they were fighting against the Axis powers. Now, in India, whoever those countries are there, all such countries must be, driven out from India. Another important task was assigned to provisional government was to establish a permanent national government. First thing was to drive British away from India. Second thing was to establish a permanent national government, because provisional government is always a temporary government. So permanent national government called Azad Hind. So Azad means freedom, Hind means India. So a permanent national government called Azad Hind was proposed to establish in India once they get liberated from British. So after this Indian National Army and setting up its two provisional government and its objectives were clear. In 1944, Subhash Chandra Bose shifted the headquarters of provisional government to Rangoon. So first, the provisional government was headquartered in it was headquartered in Singapore, right? So later the headquarters was changed to Rangoon. So you can imagine if this is India, okay. So just for your understanding, I'm just drawing. Please don't mind with my drawing. So if this is India, no, like what happened earlier, some these are all the, I mean, from these places, these are all the islands. You can call this like eastern part. Okay, so from this part, first it was set up in like Singapore, and from that Singapore, he was slowly reaching to India. So by this time, Rangoon or Burma, it was occupied by the Axis powers. So Japan would occupy Burma and all. So now the headquarters has been shifted to Rangoon. Indian National Army was nearing India. So from the eastern part, they were in Singapore. Next, they came to Rangoon, and the shifting of headquarters was a momentous importance to the movement because only the border separated India from Myanmar. So that is very closely this Myanmar and India would reside. So Subhash Chandra Bose and the provisional government under. So now earlier they were little far away in Singapore. Now they came almost very close to the border of India. So that was a very important occasion for Indian National Army now. And also the eastern gates of India were within the reach of Subhash Chandra Bose and his Liberation Army. That means they were very close to the because this Myanmar and all comes to the eastern part of the India, and they were in a just border distance. So only the physical border they have, and now Indian National Armies are very close to Indian borders, and they felt that through this eastern side they can enter India and fight against the British. And the provisional government acquired its first stretch of territory in India when Japan handed over Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So when Japan attacked this Burma and all, it even occupied these Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So they gave to the provisional government these places, and the first territories that the Indian National Army could get of India was this Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So Bose renamed them as the Shahid and Swaraj Islands. So what do you mean by Shahid? Shahid means a martyr or a person who dies a soldier who dies in a war bravely. So uh, celebrating the victory over Andaman and Nicobar Islands also. As they got into their hands, Subhash Chandra Bose renamed them as Shahid and Swaraj Islands. And Subhash Chandra Bose gave the call to his soldiers. So there were some famous slogans. There were some famous slogans like, give me blood and I shall give you freedom. His battle cries were Delhi Chalo. See why Delhi was figured out as a very important place because this was the headquarters from which the British government was working. So his slogan of Delhi Chalo to armies was so that if they capture the Delhi, which was a nerve center of British rule, then they can rule the India. They can drive British away from India. And also Jai Hind, the victory to India, was also a famous slogan given by Subhash Chandra Bose during those days. So, what are the achievements of Indian National Army and Netaji? So, did they achieved? What are their achievements? That we will see now. After they came to Burma and they became uh, the government even controlled Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Then, along with that, what are the later achievements of Indian National Army? Indian National Army made preparations to launch its fight for the liberation of India. So, as they were very close to Indian borders now, earlier they were little far away in Singapore. Now they were very close to India and almost in Burma now. Now, what happened? The Indian National Army captured Modoc, an outpost situated in southeast of Chittagong, and advanced up to the frontier of India. So this Modoc and Chittagong, they were the places in present-day East Bengal or Bangladesh. So they almost reached the next bordering country, which is very very close, and they were occupied even a very important outpost where the British soldiers and British and Allied soldiers used to say God. So they went and almost occupied this important outpost in Chittagong and Modoc, which are which are in East Bengal side or modern day Bangladesh side. So now they started even entering into India. That was the biggest achievement they have done. You can see in picture, Subhash Chandra Bose with Japanese and others in Burma. So they also captured the strong military post called Klang Klang. So now imagine that from Singapore they have reached Burma, and from Burma they are reaching to Bangladesh, modern day Bangladesh, which is those days it was part of India, the East Bengal part. So they even occupied the important military post called Klang Klang, which belongs to the British and Allied forces. It gave tough fight to British forces in the Assam hills and succeeded in capturing Ukral and Kohima. So Assam hills also they almost reached now Assam, and they were fighting very bravely there. The Indian National Army also they have reached to Kohima, so Nagaland, right, capital city. So they have almost captured all the Kohima and other Ukral places in Nagaland. And see, from Singapore, they came to Myanmar, and from Myanmar, they have arrived to the East Bengal or Bangladesh of modern day, and now they have extended their warfare to Assam and later to this, Nagaland. You can see the series of victories that was happening for Indian National Army, and even after the capture of Kohima and Ukral, they raised the tricolor flag for the first time on the liberated Indian soil. So they even hoisted the tricolor flag as a mark of their victory. And fate of the Indian National Army and Netaji. So the Indian National Army's victories were short-lived. They were 3 kilometers from Impal when the Japanese forces had to withdraw from Indo-Burma border because of their entanglement with Americans in Pacific Ocean. So the fate of Indian National Army and Netaji, we can discuss that, like we can conclude this in 3 points. That is, it was short-lived, we said. Why it was short-lived, the victories, why suddenly, what happened to this Indian National Army and what does the fate means. Indo-Japanese had to withdraw from Indo-Burma border because of their entanglement with the Americans in Pacific Ocean. So in Pacific Ocean, the situations were very complicated and more forces were required for Japan to fight against Americans there. So now what happened? This made Japan to withdraw the Indo-Burma forces. So they wanted to use these forces more in Pacific Ocean area where Americans are directly trying to entangle with them. That is trying to make situations complicated there. And this Japan is also it's an island in Pacific Ocean. So they don't want to lose their control over Pacific Ocean. So they shifted all the Indo-Burma border forces which were a support to Indian National Army to send them back to this Pacific Ocean area. At the same time, rainy season set in, so which would create a very difficult situation here. So Assam Hills and Naga Hills, where there will be heavy rains and no, you can't even fight very effectively. There will be a heavy rains. So this also geographically a very difficult situation arose in this region, and Rangoon was recaptured by British. So very soon, Rangoon or Burma was recaptured by British. As Japanese forces left, all their machinery, main weapons, and all also will leave with them, right? So naturally, they also faced a little difficulty. Indian National Army faced a little difficulty now. Indian National Army men were disarmed and made prisoners of war. So in Rangoon, the Indian National Army was captured. Group of soldiers were captured and they were kept as prisoners. The surrender of Japan in Second World War on August 15, 1945, sealed the fate of Indian National Army also. So in Second World War, this atomic bomb attack on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th, 1945. So by August 15th, 1945, Japan surrendered to America. Globally, Indian National Army lost its huge supporter, Japan. So on one hand, left of Indo-Burma border forces, on the other hand, heavy rains in those regions, and the third important factor, Japan's surrender to America in Second World War made Indian National Army forces also to become weak, and they lost their weapon supplier, and they also lost their moral backup. So Netaji left Rangoon for Bangkok. Okay, so now when situations were turning complicated and even Japan got surrendered, Netaji he left Myanmar, or, sorry, Rangoon or Burma, and he went for Bangkok. Thereafter, he flew to Tokyo. While on his way to Tokyo, he is said to have received fatal injuries in a plane crash, and his death occurred. So, after the complicated situations in between Indian National Army and British forces now, because Indian National Army became supportless, now he started because he thought that he must safeguard himself to build another movement later. So what he started, he flew to Bangkok first, and from there he flew to Tokyo. But while he was flying to Tokyo in a plane, his plane got crashed, and in that he with fatal injuries, means he died with some injuries. Japanese official version was that Netaji died on August 18th, 1945 itself. So Japanese say that within 3 days, when he was coming to Tokyo, he died in a plane crash. And impact of this Indian National Army. The revolt of 1942 and Indian National Army had revealed heroism of Indians. See, imagine the amount of efforts they kept outside India, taking support of convincing other people. They gathered people and created a huge army, and they mobilized a government for it. They pooled some resources, is it not? These are all the great efforts, heroic efforts you can call. And later they arrived till almost Assam, Nagaland, and they fought very bravely. So that was a very heroic act. The historians describe this as Indian National Army's a great impact. With the end of the Second World War and release of with the end of Second World War in 1945, several Congress leaders were released from jail, and people were thinking that yes, and even several leaders of this Indian National Army were also released. Now, people were looking forward for another revolt, perhaps the final struggle of freedom. So, on one hand, the Indian National Army made inspire people in India, and leaders also they were waiting to come out as war ended, and they may try to participate in the later part of struggle. And Indian National Army inspired uprisings in armed forces of the country. So the armed forces who are working for British, now they have realized how they have got inspired by the Indian National Army and its struggle, and they also started its uprising. That means they also started the revolts in Kolkata, Chennai, and Karachi. There were many revolts by armies inspiring from the Indian National Army, and these naval revolts shook the foundation of British Empire. So navy wise, it they just revolted against the British, and now the way they came up even made British more worried. So the new struggle took the form of a massive movement against the trial of soldiers and officers of Indian National Army. See, when Indian National Army soldiers and officers were captured after the Second World War and in the Burma and all, they have captured all the soldiers, right? When they captured, they kept for trial. That means they were trying to punish on the grounds of sedition, that they went against the government of British, right? So they wanted to punish all these soldiers, and this also created a great what you call sentiment in Indians, and they were trying to go against British in India. The government decided to put on trial in the Red Fort of Delhi. So Red Fort was used as a court of trial in, I mean, for some time for all the soldiers and important officers of Indian National Army. So there were some important leaders who were prosecuted those days, like Shah Nawaz Khan, Gurdial Singh Dhillon, and Prem Sehgal. So these were the important officers of Indian National Army who were kept under trial and inquiry, and they wanted to punish these people. But on the other hand, there was a people of India. They were trying to they were trying to show their support to these officers, and they are also trying to revolt now. People welcomed them as national heroes. So when they were brought for trial, people started praising them and looking them as heroes, and demonstrations were also held to release these officers. So the British government was at that time no position to ignore Indian opinion also. So on one hand, the Britishers were also vexed up with Indian affairs because by this time non-cooperation, civil disobedience and quit India, they also were facing internally from Indian National Congress several movements from common people. And also they faced a very complicated situations outside India from the Indian National Army and Japan. So with all these things, they also got understood that it is no longer possible to rule, Indians forcibly. So they also felt they wanted to conduct a court martial, and they wanted, but finally they set all the prisoners free. Court martial means within the armies, the army heads will decide the, because the Indian armed soldiers have done mistakes. Right? I mean, they joined hands with Japan, and they, as per British, they committed a crime. So those days, any army person commits a, or if any army person goes against the rules of army, they'll be undergoing court martial. That means the army heads will take the job of keeping them trial and inquiry and all. So even though court martial was conducted, due to pressures from Indian side, they were allowed set free. Indian National Army set an inspiring example of patriotism. So these are all the general terminologies which they were using from the beginning. That means national sentiment was increased, and sacrifices of soldiers led to political consciousness among the Indian forces. That means the Indian armed forces felt politically, yes, situations were, they changed situations in India politically also. The British now realized that they could not rely on Indian forces to continue their rule in India. So earlier they managed the Indian forces and they successfully ruled India. But now armed forces are also trying going against British, which the British cannot handle. See, some thousands and thousands of soldiers, how can they suppress for a long period of time? It is not possible. And if in future also they may again revolt. After 1857, this was a huge military revolt that the Britishers have faced. So they also thought that this is not anymore possible to rule India.